Etched, it was supposed to be a routine private engagement, quiet, unannounced, almost invisible to the public eye. But when Prince William and Princess Catherine arrived at St. Mary's Hospital under heavy security just hours after devastating family news emerged, palace insiders immediately sensed something far darker unfolding behind the polished walls of Kensington Palace. The smiles were gone. The timing was impossible to ignore. And according to royal aides, this was no ordinary visit. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Reports suggest the visit had not appeared anywhere on the court circular, the tightly managed schedule that traditionally tracks official royal movements. That alone immediately raised alarm bells among veteran royal correspondents. For a family built on protocol, visibility, and carefully choreographed appearances, disappearing into a London hospital without warning was almost unheard of. Yet shortly after sunset, witnesses claim a dark convoy swept quietly through a secured side entrance as protection officers moved swiftly to block photographers from approaching the building. And longtime hospital staff reportedly sensed the atmosphere was unusually tense. One insider later described it as a silence that felt heavier than words. And then came the images that intensified speculation across Britain almost instantly. Catherine, normally composed under immense public scrutiny, appeared emotionally exhausted. Observers noted the Princess of Wales avoided prolonged eye contact with waiting staff and kept unusually close to William as they moved through the private wing. Different interpretations of the evening describe her expression as strained, pale, even deeply shaken. Meanwhile, William, typically measured and controlled in public, was reportedly seen speaking urgently with senior aides moments before entering the hospital corridor. Palace administrative streams, ranging from media whispers to security chatter, began circulating claims that something deeply personal had unfolded behind closed doors only hours earlier. What made the situation even more unsettling was the extraordinary level of secrecy surrounding the visit. Sources close to royal operations claim senior palace aides were instructed to remain silent and avoid discussing the matter even internally. Several scheduled engagements connected to the Wales household were quietly postponed without explanation. And while official spokespeople attempted to downplay growing concern, the British press immediately recognized familiar warning signs. Royal historians and veteran correspondents began drawing chilling comparisons to previous moments of crisis inside the House of Windsor, moments when sudden hospital visits signaled much larger personal tragedies unfolding away from public view. By midnight, speculation had exploded across British media circles. Some reports hinted at an unexpected medical emergency connected to a senior family member. Others suggested the devastating news involved someone emotionally close to William and Catherine, triggering immediate concern inside Kensington Palace. Insiders whisper that several members of the royal communications team worked through the night attempting to contain what they feared could become a full-scale media storm. Yet the more the palace tried to maintain silence, the more intense public curiosity became. And perhaps most striking of all was the visible emotional weight carried by Catherine throughout the ordeal. Those family, my ally, with royal protocol, understand how carefully senior royals are trained to maintain composure under pressure. But according to multiple eyewitness accounts, there were moments during the visit when the future queen appeared on the verge of breaking down entirely. William reportedly remained close to her side the entire evening, offering quiet reassurance while shielding her from growing media attention. It was a deeply human moment inside an institution built on restraint, discipline, and silence. Still, behind the tightly controlled statements and carefully guarded palace gates, insiders claim the real story had not yet surfaced. Because according to royal correspondents now piecing together the timeline, the hospital visit itself was merely the aftermath of something far more devastating that had unfolded only hours before. And as whispers spread through the highest circles of the monarchy, one chilling detail kept resurfacing again and again: a private phone call that reportedly left the future king completely shaken. But the hospital visit was only the surface of a far more painful reality, one tied to a private phone call that reportedly changed everything overnight. According to multiple palace insiders, the call came shortly after midnight. By sunrise, senior staff had already begun rearranging schedules, canceling briefings, and preparing what one royal correspondent described as an atmosphere of controlled panic. Whatever William heard during that conversation reportedly left the future king devastated and Catherine in tears. The timing alone immediately triggered concern throughout royal circles. Sources close to Kensington Palace claim the emergency communication arrived through a secured internal line rarely used except during moments of extreme family crisis. Within minutes, lights reportedly remained on across multiple royal offices long after midnight, as aides scrambled to assess the seriousness of the situation unfolding behind the scenes. One palace insider later suggested the speed of the response was unlike anything staff had witnessed in months. And perhaps most telling of all, no official clarification came from the palace by morning. There were no calming statements, no routine public appearances, only silence. Heavy, deliberate silence. By dawn, royal schedules had allegedly been cleared with extraordinary urgency. Several private engagements connected to William and Catherine quietly disappeared from internal calendars without explanation, while briefings expected later that morning were abruptly postponed. Royal reporters immediately noticed the disruption. According to various interpretations circulating among palace correspondents, staff members were instructed to avoid discussing the matter entirely even with colleagues inside the royal household. That level of secrecy only intensified fears that the situation was deeply personal and potentially devastating for the family. What unfolded next reportedly left even experienced royal aides shaken. Family members, according to insiders, were informed gradually rather than all at once, suggesting senior royals were attempting to contain emotional fallout while critical decisions were being made privately. Hospital specialists were allegedly consulted almost immediately following the midnight call, fueling growing speculation that the crisis involved a sudden medical development connected to someone close to the monarchy. Yet despite mounting public concern, the palace communications team remained unusually restrained. Reporters who typically receive quiet ground guidance from royal aides suddenly found themselves completely frozen out. One veteran royal editor described the atmosphere as a blackout wrapped inside another blackout. At the center of it all stood Prince William, whose reaction reportedly alarmed those closest to him. Multiple insiders claim the future king appeared visibly distressed throughout the early morning hours, pacing between private rooms while senior advisors attempted to manage an increasingly fragile situation. Those familiar with William's normally disciplined demeanor described the emotional shift as impossible to miss. Some reports even suggest he personally contacted certain family members before official palace channels could intervene, an extraordinary move that hinted at just how deeply the news had affected him. Catherine, meanwhile, was reportedly left emotionally overwhelmed by the gravity of what had been revealed during the call. According to palace whispers now circulating among royal commentators, the Princess of Wales spent much of the morning shielded from external pressures as concern intensified behind closed doors. The emotional strain surrounding the Wales household was becoming incredibly emerged, easingly difficult to contain, particularly as British media outlets began noticing the complete absence of normal royal operations. Questions rapidly spread across newspapers, television panels, and social media platforms. Why had the palace gone so quiet? Why were senior aides refusing to answer even routine inquiries? And perhaps most unsettling of all, who inside the royal family had known about this situation before the public became aware something was wrong? That final question would soon become the center of an even deeper mystery. Because while Kensington Palace fought desperately to control speculation, attention quietly began shifting elsewhere inside the House of Windsor. As journalists pieced together timelines and insiders continued leaking fragments of information, one troubling detail suddenly became impossible to ignore. A senior member of the royal family had vanished entirely from public view during the crisis, and the palace appeared unwilling to explain why. Yet as details slowly emerged, attention shifted toward one family member whose absence suddenly became impossible to explain. For nearly 48 hours, one senior royal vanished completely from public vive. No statement, no appearance, no photographs. In a monarchy built on visibility and ritual, the silence felt deafening. And insiders now claim the disappearance was directly connected to the heartbreaking development that forced William and Catherine into emergency action. Almost immediately, speculation inside royal circles reached dangerous levels. Under normal circumstances, even minor schedule adjustments involving senior members of the royal family are carefully explained through official channels. But this time, there was nothing. No clarification from Buckingham Palace. No routine updates from Kensington Palace. Only growing confusion as royal engagements quietly disappeared from public calendars one by one. Veteran correspondents who had spent decades covering the monarchy began openly acknowledging that something deeply unusual was happening behind palace walls. According to various interpretations emerging from royal insiders, staff members were allegedly instructed to avoid answering direct media questions regarding the missing royals' whereabouts. Even senior aides reportedly appeared uncomfortable during off-record conversations with journalists, carefully choosing "I" words while refusing to offer reassurance. That refusal only intensified public anxiety. In an institution where appearances are often used to calm uncertainty, the complete absence of one prominent royal figure created a vacuum that speculation rushed to fill almost instantly. And then came reports of unusual transportation activity that further deepened the mystery. Royal watchers monitoring movements near both Kensington Palace and Windsor allegedly noticed multiple unannounced vehicle departures late at night, accompanied by increased security coordination rarely seen outside periods of national concern. Sources familiar with palace logistics claimed routes were altered with extraordinary secrecy, while protection officers reportedly tightened access around key royal residences. Although no official connection was confirmed, many observers began suspecting the family was privately responding to a rapidly escalating situation far more serious than initially believed. Behind closed doors, insiders whisper that tensions within the royal household were beginning to intensify. Different interpretations of private discussions describe a family struggling under enormous emotional pressure. Unsure as conflicting concerns collided all at once: health fears, public scrutiny, and the growing challenge of maintaining stability inside an already fragile monarchy. William, according to several palace sources, had become increasingly protective of Catherine throughout the ordeal, while senior advisors worked frantically to contain what they feared could spiral into a full constitutional distraction if public panic continued escalating. For many longtime royal observers, the atmosphere felt hauntingly familiar. Comparisons quickly emerged to previous palace crises that had shaken public confidence in the monarchy for generations. Some commentators referenced the tense days surrounding Queen Elizabeth II's final public appearances. Others drew darker parallels to moments when silence inside the House of Windsor only amplified national unease rather than calming it. Royal historians began warning publicly that the institution was entering a period of serious internal strain, particularly as trust between the palace and the public appeared to weaken by the hour. Meanwhile, social media transformed into a storm of theories, fear, and relentless speculation. Every cancelled appearance, became a headline. Every delayed statement fueled another wave of rumors. International media outlets joined the frenzy, dissecting every detail surrounding the hospital visit, the emergency phone call, and now the unexplained disappearance of a senior royal. Yet despite the mounting pressure, the palace remained stubbornly silent. And according to insiders, that silence was not accidental. It was strategic, deliberate, perhaps even necessary. But beneath the growing media chaos and institutional pressure, another painful reality was quietly taking shape inside the Wales household itself. Because while the public focused on the missing royal and the spreading speculation, Catherine was reportedly facing an emotional struggle far more personal than anyone outside palace walls fully understood. Those closest to the Princess of Wales allegedly began noticing signs that the strain was becoming overwhelming, raising fresh concerns about just how deeply this unfolding tragedy was affecting the future queen behind the scenes. But behind the scenes, another deeply personal struggle was quietly unfolding, one that Catherine reportedly took especially hard. Witnesses described Princess Cat. Monet emerged, Haran as composed but only barely. During the hospital visit, aides reportedly stepped in repeatedly to shield her from cameras as emotions threatened to overwhelm the future queen. For those closest to the Wales family, the pain was becoming impossible to hide. According to insiders familiar with the atmosphere surrounding the royal household, the emotional toll on Catherine had been building quietly for weeks before the crisis finally erupted into public view. While palace officials continued attempting to project calm and stability, those working behind closed doors allegedly witnessed a very different reality unfolding inside Kensington Palace. One source described the mood as somber beyond words, claiming the Princess of Wales had been carrying the emotional weight of multiple private pressures long before the hospital visit intensified public concern. And during one particularly emotional moment, Witnesses reportedly observed Catherine wiping away tears while speaking privately with aides away from the growing media presence. For many royal watchers, it was deeply unsettling. Catherine has long been viewed as one of the monarchy's most disciplined and composed figures, maintaining grace even during moments of intense scrutiny. Yet insiders now suggest the strain surrounding the family had pushed her dangerously close to emotional exhaustion. Reports claim William became increasingly protective throughout the ordeal, refusing to leave Catherine's side as uncertainty continued spreading through both the family and the institution itself. What made the situation even more heartbreaking, according to palace whispers, was the effect the crisis was allegedly having on the Wales children. Sources close to royal staff claim Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were all being carefully shielded from the mounting speculation consuming public discourse. Yet despite efforts to preserve normalcy, insiders suggest the emotional tension inside the household had become impossible to fully conceal. One palace source quietly admitted that everyone around the family appeared deeply affected, with concern growing over how prolonged instability might impact the young royals emotionally. As the days passed, the public also began noticing subtle but undeniable changes in Catherine's demeanor. Royal commentators pointed out that her appearances, though limited, seemed more emotionally restrained than usual. Her normally effortless warmth appeared weighed down by something heavier, something private and unresolved. Veteran royal correspondents who had followed Catherine for years began openly discussing the enormous emotional burden she had carried throughout recent months, not only as a future queen but as a mother, wife, and stabilizing force inside an increasingly fragile monarchy. At the same time, questions surrounding the relentless pressure placed upon the Wales family grew louder. Various interpretations from royal analysts suggested William and Catherine had been forced into an impossible balancing act, maintaining public confidence while privately navigating emotional turmoil few fully understood. With King Charles already facing ongoing health concerns and tensions inside the wider royal institution continuing to simmer, the Wales family increasingly appeared trapped at the center of a monarchy struggling to steady itself against wave after wave of crisis. And perhaps that was what unsettled royal observers most of all. Behind the carefully managed appearances and official statements, there were growing years that the emotional strain was no longer temporary. Royal historians and commentators began warning that prolonged pressure on the future, King and Queen, could carry serious long-term consequences not only for their family, but for the future stability of the monarchy itself. The public sympathy surrounding William and Catherine continued intensifying, but so did concern about whether the institution was demanding too much from the very people expected to save it. Yet even as the emotional shock surrounding the Wales family deepened behind palace walls, another dangerous problem was beginning to emerge. Because while Catherine struggled privately under extraordinary pressure, senior palace officials were allegedly becoming increasingly alarmed by the wider implications of the crisis. The family was hurting, the public was growing restless, and according to insiders, the monarchy itself was now approaching a moment of genuine instability. However, the emotional shock soon collided with another harsh reality: the monarchy itself was entering dangerous territory. As the family struggled privately, palace officials launched what insiders allegedly called a containment operation. Eatings stretched late into the night. Communications teams coordinated responses minute by minute. And according to reports, senior royals feared the tragic news could trigger a public relations crisis at the worst possible moment for the monarchy. Inside royal households across London and Windsor, the atmosphere reportedly became increasingly frantic as advisors attempted to regain control of a situation spiraling dangerously close to public chaos. Emergency meetings were allegedly held across multiple palace residences, with senior aides moving between offices long after midnight while legal teams, communications staff, and private secretaries coordinated strategies behind closed doors. According to insiders familiar with the discussions, officials feared the combination of emotional uncertainty, media speculation, and growing public anxiety could evolve into something far larger than a temporary royal controversy. Some even whispered that the institution itself was entering one of its most fragile periods in years. What made the situation especially alarming, according to palace correspondents, was how quickly the original media strategy appeared to collapse. Initial attempts to minimize public concern reportedly failed almost immediately once journalists began connecting the hospital visit the emergency phone call, and the unexplained disappearance of a senior royal. By sunrise, insiders claimed communications plans were being rewritten in real time as advisors struggled to contain an avalanche of speculation consuming headlines across Britain. Royal commentators noted the unusual lack of coordinated messaging coming from palace officials, fueling further suspicion that senior members of the family themselves were deeply divided over how much should be revealed publicly. At the center of those concerns stood Prince William, who insiders increasingly described as the monarchy's reluctant stabilizing force during the unfolding crisis. Reports suggest senior courtiers had quietly begun positioning the future king as the face of reassurance while tensions escalated behind palace walls. Various interpretations from royal analysts claimed William was now carrying a level of responsibility that extended far beyond protecting his immediate family. He was being forced to steady public confidence in the monarchy itself while privately navigating grief, uncertainty, emotional strain. Meanwhile, King Charles was reportedly said to be personally devastated by the events unfolding around him. Sources close to palace operations claim the king remained deeply affected not only by the tragic family news, but by fears surrounding the broader impact on the institution he had spent his entire life preparing to lead. Already facing enormous personal pressures of his own, Charles allegedly became increasingly concerned that the monarchy's image of continuity and stability was beginning to fracture under the weight of repeated crises. Some insiders even suggested private discussions had grown emotionally tense as senior royals debated how to protect both the family and the crown from lasting damage. Behind the scenes, aides reportedly feared a growing public backlash if transparency did not improve quickly. Social media speculation had already exploded internationally, while British tabloids and television networks dissected every silence, every cancelled engagement, and every carefully worded palace statement. Royal historians began appearing across major media platforms warning about the fragility of the modern monarchy in an era where secrecy often fuels distrust instead of preserving dignity. According to several commentators, the institution was facing a dangerous balancing act. Reveal too much and risk exposing private family pain, reveal too little and risk losing public confidence entirely. At the same time, pressure on the younger generation of royals intensified dramatically. William and Catherine were no longer viewed simply as future leaders waiting patiently in the background. In the eyes of many observers, they had suddenly become the emotional center of a monarchy struggling to survive relentless instability. Every gesture, every appearance, every expression now carried enormous symbolic weight. And as palace officials worked desperately to control the narrative, one heartbreaking moment outside the hospital unexpectedly cut through the noise and captured the attention of millions around the world. Because amid all the strategy meetings, media panic, and institutional fear, the public suddenly witnessed something painfully human, a brief exchange, a quiet gesture, a moment so emotionally raw that it instantly shifted the national conversation away from speculation and directly toward the heartbreak consumed itself. But amid the fear and confusion, one heartbreaking hospital moment suddenly captured the attention of the entire nation. It lasted only seconds. Yet for millions watching closely, the quiet exchange between William and Catherine outside the hospital said more than any palace statement ever could. A hand squeeze, a lowered glance, and a silence so heavy it instantly reignited fears that the royal family was enduring one of its darkest chapters in years. The footage spread across British media within minutes. At first, it appeared to be just another brief clip captured during a tense royal appearance. But the longer people watched, the more emotionally devastating it became. There were no dramatic gestures, no carefully crafted remarks, only two people standing beneath the crushing weight of something deeply painful, trying desperately to remain composed while the entire world watched them unravel in real time. And according to royal commentators, that quiet moment pierced through public attention in a way official statements never could. Almost overnight, sympathy for William and Catherine surged to extraordinary levels. Across television broadcasts, newspaper columns, and social media platforms, public discussion shifted away from palace secrecy and toward concern for the Wales family themselves. Many viewers described the interaction as heartbreakingly human. Others admitted it reminded them of earlier periods of public grief that had once shaken the monarchy to its core. What made the moment so powerful was not simply sadness, it was recognition. For the first time since the crisis began, The emotional reality behind palace walls suddenly felt visible to ordinary people watching from home. Body language experts soon entered the conversation, analyzing every subtle movement between the Prince and Princess of Wales with intense scrutiny. Some described William's protective posture as evidence of overwhelming emotional pressure behind the scenes. Others focused on Catherine's expression, claiming it reflected exhaustion, heartbreak, and quiet determination all at once. While interpretations varied, nearly every commentator agreed on one thing. The couple appeared emotionally drained in a way the public had rarely witnessed before, and that realization only deepened national concern. Even hospital staff were reportedly moved by the emerged interaction. According to insiders familiar with the atmosphere surrounding the visit, several employees privately described the emotional weight carried by both William and Catherine as impossible to ignore. Sources claim the future king remained unusually attentive to Catherine throughout the ordeal, refusing to step ahead of her or allow her to face the growing media storm alone. It was a striking contrast to the rigid emotional restraint often associated with royal life. Behind the titles and ceremony, the public suddenly saw a husband protecting his wife during one of the hardest moments of their lives. Outside palace gates, crowds soon began gathering quietly in support of the royal family. Flowers appeared, handwritten messages multiplied. Social media became flooded with emotional tributes from supporters expressing sympathy, concern, and growing fear over what might still remain hidden from public view. For older generations especially, the atmosphere reportedly stirred painful memories of the overwhelming national grief that followed Princess Diana's darkest chapters. Royal historians began openly discussing how moments of visible vulnerability have historically transformed public relationships with the monarchy forever. But with sympathy also came mounting pressure. The more emotionally invested the public became, the louder demands for transparency grew. Why was the palace still withholding information? Why were senior royals remaining silent while speculation intensified globally? Critics argued the institution's refusal to speak openly was fueling confusion at precisely the moment the public most needed reassurance. And according to insiders, palace officials were becoming increasingly aware that silence itself had now become part of the crisis. By this point, the emotional tide surrounding the story had become impossible to contain. Public curiosity had evolved into something deeper, and an urgent desire to understand the tragedy at the center of the royal family's pain. And just as speculation reached its most intense point, new whispers began emerging from inside palace circles. Carefully controlled at first, quietly passed between reporters and royal correspondents, but enough to suggest the heartbreaking truth was finally beginning to surface. And then, just as speculation reached its peak, insiders began revealing the tragic truth at the center. A tear of it all. After days of secrecy, carefully worded leaks and whispered confirmations finally painted a clearer picture of the tragedy that had shaken the House of Windsor. Reports now suggest the crisis was even more painful than initially feared and deeply personal for William, Catherine, and the entire royal household. According to trusted royal correspondents, fragments of information began emerging only after intense pressure mounted behind palace walls. What had initially been dismissed as vague speculation was now evolving into something far more serious. Multiple insiders claimed the family had been completely blindsided by a sudden development that unfolded with terrifying speed, forcing senior royals into emergency discussions almost immediately. While official statements remained carefully restrained, the emotional tone surrounding those private conversations reportedly revealed the depth of the shock consuming the monarchy from within. For Prince William, the emotional burden allegedly became significantly heavier as the full reality of the situation settled over the family. Sources close to palace operations suggest the future king had spent days attempting to remain steady for those around him while privately struggling under immense pressure himself. Several insiders described him as emotionally exhausted, torn between protecting his family, supporting Catherine, and fulfilling growing expectations that he step forward as the monarchy's stabilizing force during a period of uncertainty. The contrast was striking. Publicly, William remained composed. Privately, according to palace whispers, the weight of responsibility was becoming almost unbearable. And through it all, Catherine reportedly emerged as the emotional anchor holding the Wales household together. Royal aides speaking cautiously to trusted correspondents suggested the Princess of Wales had been praised privately for maintaining calm despite the enormous emotional strain surrounding the family. Those closest to the situation allegedly described her as quietly resilient, focusing intensely on protecting her children and supporting William, while the institution around them struggled to regain control. Yet behind that resilience, insiders claim the emotional toll remained profound. The pressure, the uncertainty, and the relentless public attention had pushed the family into one of the most painful chapters they had faced in years. Even palace insiders reportedly admitted the situation remained fragile despite efforts to project stability publicly. According to several royal commentators, tensions inside the institution had not fully eased, largely because no one could confidently predict how deeply the emotional aftermath might affect the family moving forward. Senior advisors allegedly feared that prolonged uncertainty could continue fueling public anxiety while also placing dangerous strain on the younger generation of royals already carrying extraordinary responsibility. At the same time, the public response grew overwhelmingly sympathetic. Across Britain and beyond, support for William and Catherine intensified as more details quietly surfaced about the emotional challenges facing the family. Social media became flooded with messages of compassion, while public conversations shifted noticeably away from criticism and toward empathy. For many people, the crisis humanized the monarchy in a way years of official engagements and ceremonial appearances never fully had. Beneath the titles, the privilege, and the centuries of tradition, the public now saw a family, struggling through fear and heartbreak just like anyone else. But alongside that sympathy came another difficult reality. Questions surrounding the future responsibilities of William and Catherine began growing louder. Royal experts openly discussed whether the next generation of royals was being asked to shoulder impossible emotional and institutional burdens at a time when the monarchy itself appeared increasingly vulnerable. Some historians warned that prolonged crises inside the House of Windsor could permanently reshape how the institution functions moving forward. Others quietly acknowledged that recovery, both personal and institutional, might take far longer than palace officials were prepared to admit publicly. And perhaps that was the most unsettling realization of all. Even as the immediate shock slowly began settling into grief, there remained a growing sense that the monarchy had crossed into unfamiliar territory. The family was wounded, public confidence had been shaken, and while the palace continued attempting to steady itself against the storm, insiders quietly admitted that healing from this chapter would not happen quickly. The emotional scars, according to several commentators, could linger for months, perhaps even years. But even amid grief, the monarchy faced a difficult question: how would the family move forward after this devastating chapter? Inside the ancient walls of Kensington Palace, the mood reportedly remained subdued. The tragedy may have unfolded quietly, away from cameras and royal ceremony, but its emotional impact could shape the future of the monarchy for years to come. And for William and Catherine, this painful moment may ultimately redefine not only their family but their destiny as future king and queen. According to palace insiders, the royal household has spent recent days attempting to restore some sense of normalcy behind closed doors. Yet even as schedules slowly resume and carefully managed appearances begin returning to public view, those closest to the family allegedly admit the emotional atmosphere remains deeply fragile. One royal source described the feeling inside Kensington Palace as changed forever, suggesting the emotional weight of the crisis continues lingering long after headlines began fading from the front pages. For an institution built on endurance, continuity, and tradition, the past week's report repeatedly exposed just how vulnerable even the monarchy can become when private pain collides with relentless public attention. At the center of that fragile recovery stands Prince William, increasingly viewed by both palace officials and the public as the steady future monarch the institution desperately needs. Royal commentators who once focused primarily on William's future role now speak about him differently. There is a growing perception that the future king has been forced to mature emotionally under extraordinary pressure, balancing duty with personal heartbreak, while carrying the expectations of an entire institution on his shoulders. Reports suggest senior aides have quietly praised the way he protected his family throughout the crisis, even while privately enduring enormous emotional strain himself. At the same time, public admiration for Catherine has reached remarkable new heights. The Princess of Wales, long respected for her composure and discipline, is now increasingly viewed as the emotional backbone of the modern monarchy. Across Britain, many supporters describe her as a stabilizing force whose quiet resilience helped steady both William and the wider royal household. Most painful periods in recent memory, palace insiders reportedly believe the overwhelming sympathy directed toward Catherine has fundamentally strengthened her connection with the public, not through glamour or ceremony, but through visible humanity and emotional honesty. But behind that growing public support, insiders warn the emotional damage inside the family may not disappear quickly. Several palace sources have privately described lasting emotional scars that could continue affecting relationships and responsibilities long after the immediate crisis fades from public conversation. Royal historians note that moments like these often leave permanent marks on institutions built around emotional restraint, especially when younger generations are forced to navigate grief under constant scrutiny from millions around the world. The crisis has also reportedly accelerated a broader shift within the monarchy itself. According to royal experts, the palace may now be entering a more modern era of transparency, one shaped less by rigid silence and more by emotional openness. For decades, royal households relied heavily on distance and secrecy to preserve authority. Society appears to have reminded both the institution and the public that emotional connection can sometimes strengthen the monarchy more effectively than carefully controlled perfection ever could. Public sympathy toward William and Catherine has not weakened the crown. If anything, it has reshaped how many people emotionally relate to it. Even so, difficult questions remain unanswered. Can the family truly recover emotionally while continuing to carry such enormous public responsibility? Will the next generation of royals be expected to sacrifice even more of their private lives to preserve the institution's future? And perhaps most importantly, has this tragedy permanently altered the emotional fabric of the House of Windsor itself? For now, palace officials continue trying to guide the monarchy back toward stability while protecting a family still quietly healing behind ancient palace walls. Yet insiders acknowledge the legacy of this painful chapter may endure far longer than anyone inside the institution expected, because some moments do not simply pass through history, they reshape it. And according to many royal observers, this may ultimately become one of those defi, remembered not for scandal or spectacle, but for revealing the deeply human fragility hidden beneath centuries of royal tradition. Because behind the crowns, titles, and palace gates, even the House of Windsor cannot escape the fragile heartbreak that defines every family, and sometimes, tragedy changes a monarchy forever. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.